Peace and blessings. Welcome back to the channel once again, where we talk all things health and healing from a holistic perspective. And today will be no different. Now, in the previous video, I talked about 15 signs and symptoms of mold toxicity. Now, this is hugely important. Consider what I mentioned in that video. Most healthcare professionals are not taught to not only not look for mold, let alone diagnose mold. And so it's really important we understand that this is a problem that quite often, even if it was a problem with you, it will be overlooked and often diagnosed as something else, which means that you wouldn't be actually addressing the issue. And so in the previous video, I'll talk about the signs and symptoms, 15 of them that you can kind of go through that list and see if 3 to 4, 5 or 6 of them show up. It could be a possible sign and symptom that you have mold toxicity. Now, in that video, we talked about the signs and symptoms. In this video, I'm going to talk about where do we most often find mold? What are some of those primary indicators of mold and dampness? And then lastly, how do we test for it? And how big of a problem is this? You know, as I stated in the previous video, not all mold is actually toxic. Not all mold will cause you to have, health issues. So let's first start with how big of a real problem is this? As a matter of fact, as I mentioned in the last video, the vast majority of mold toxicity is coming from indoor buildings, okay? And according to a study, 50% of buildings are water damaged, okay? 50% of buildings are water damaged. This means that if a building is water damaged, there's a high likelihood that there's mold toxicity or mold in the building, okay? And this is according to a 248-page report conducted by the World Health Organization. And they found that 50% number to hold true not only for the US, but also Australia, Europe, Japan, and also India as well too, okay? And they looked at the indoor air quality, okay? Measuring the air quality and a lot of other things as well too. And the important thing to know about when I say indoor, I'm not just talking about your home, I'm talking about your workplace, I'm talking about your children's school, I'm talking about your gym, I'm talking about all of the places that you spend lots of time. All of these buildings are considered in that 50%, which is really important. And not only old buildings, because people are under the assumption that mold is a problem for people in underserved communities, old buildings. But I had a case and scenario where I had somebody who came in and all of the signs and symptoms pointed toward mold toxicity. And they were convincing me, hey, I bought my home new. The home is less than a year old. And they were like, the previous place that I stayed in, it was pretty much all concrete. So there was not even any space for mold. And I said, well, when did the symptoms show up? And it started showing up a couple of months after I moved into the new home. I was like, well, we have to revisit it. Would you be willing to at least get a test on the new home? And they said, well, I will, but I feel like I'm going to be wasting my money. So I don't know if I really want to do that. Ended up getting a test on the home. The home was 8 months old, found mold in most of the kitchen, the downstairs bathroom, and a large portion of the living room. Okay, this was a home that was less than 8 months old. So again, it's really important to understand that, again, this issue is for all indoor buildings, new, old, home, work, school, okay? Any and all buildings. 50% of them have water damage. I always say the way that we used to build things before, we do not build things like that today. And so things do not last long. And so things get damaged very quickly today, okay? Now, these damaged buildings, 50% of the buildings in the US, in Australia, in Europe, in Japan, in India, they refer to these buildings as sick building syndrome. They even have a syndrome for these buildings. And this syndrome is often indicated by having a humidity greater than or equal to 80% And because mold flourishes, I mean, it thrives at a humidity around 90%. Okay. And so they considered a condition for buildings, sick building syndrome. Okay. So, and this not only creates a mold issue, it creates so many other issues as well, too. And it's really important. So, buildings are a primary way that we come into contact with a lot of mold toxicity. And how is that? Okay. Because most of the places that you need to sort of look for that, I'll talk about that in a second. But it's important to know how to kind of take your lenses and have an eye for this thing. So we're going to talk about that in a second, but also keep in mind hotels and Airbnbs as well too. That's another way that we're coming into contact with a lot of mold, because again, a lot of these places aren't maintained like they need to. Okay, like they need to be maintained. So Airbnbs handled by people who quite often don't know the signs and symptoms of mold toxicity, who don't properly clean the areas like they need to be cleaned. Okay, so hotels and Airbnbs, but also another source of mold toxicity or mycotoxins is foodborne mycotoxins. Okay, a lot of the grains we consume, the wheat, the rye, the oats, the cereals, even nuts and coffee beans. A lot of them sit in warehouses months after months, sometimes even years before they're actually packaged and you receive them in your home. And while they're sitting in those dark warehouses that are damp because they're keeping them cool, they're festering in mold sometimes as well too. Okay, so it's hugely important. A lot of the ways that we're getting mold as well is through our food as well too, because again, we're eating so much food that is essentially been sitting in a warehouse for a year. Okay, but also possibly through leftovers as well too. A lot of us eat a lot of leftovers, and what happens is you take the leftovers, which are warm in the container. Okay, they're warm in the container. You put them inside a refrigerator, which is cool. So now you got the warmth of the food coming in contact with the coolness of the refrigerator, which creates condensation, dampness, which causes the food to eventually get mold on it as well too. And again, you can't always see mold. Okay, you can't always smell mold. We like to think that we can see the moldy bread. So of course, like if we open the container and we see mold, we know it's not any good anymore. But quite often you don't, there's mold before there's invisible mold before there's visual mold. Okay, so hugely important. That's another way that we get a lot of foodborne mycotoxins as well, through leftovers as well too. So those are just a few ways that we're getting exposed, and the primary ways that we're getting exposed to a lot of mold toxicity, again, at work, in our homes, our children at school. And this is a really big issue, especially in the underserved communities and Black and brown communities, because a lot of the homes that people are living in are much older homes. And much older homes are more prone to a lot of the mold as well too, because the home eventually will begin to break down, especially if it's not like a brick home. Okay. A lot of those homes will have foundational issues, so water will start to seep into the foundation. A lot of those homes have issues with the HVAC systems and also the water heater as well too, that they're not aware of. Case in point, I had a client who had an issue with their HVAC and they weren't aware of it, but they had an older HVAC system, which is the air conditioner unit, either on the outside of the house, but often it actually can be in the attic of the house as well too, to kind of heat and cool the area upstairs, right? And so a lot of the older ones will have these condensation pans where water or condensation goes into the pan, and then you as the owner are periodically supposed to check it and pour the water out and get rid of it. Well, they weren't aware of it. So this pan just kept overflowing and overflowing over the courses of months and years, creating a mold issue in the whole attic area. Okay? So it's hugely important to know and understand that, again, this happened in an older home, and this quite often happens in even more likely in underserved areas, okay? Because a lot of landlords do not take care of the home the way that they need to take care of the homes, okay? So again, this is a really big issue. 50% of buildings in the US, other countries, are water damage, which means that if there's water damage, there's a high likelihood of, mold toxicity and mold in general. And what's really important to understand about that is that about 40% of people develop asthma. 40% of people develop asthma after coming into contact with mold. Okay. And around, again, 50% of homes have mold, okay, or have the potential for mold. And then 93% of sinus infections are caused by molds, okay? People living in mold environments, okay, being exposed to mold toxicity. So this is a really huge issue. And again, if you have not watched the first video where I go through those 15 signs and symptoms of mold toxicity, please go watch that, because again, it will help you sort of do some inner work before you decide what you want to do next. Because at the end, we're going to talk about the types of tests that you need to go to your physician and speak with them about to make sure you don't have this issue, okay? Now, let's talk about some of the primary indicators that you have mold or there is mold, okay? One of the primary ones is the easiest one, which is visual mold. You can see it, okay? You can see the black or the green or whatever it may be, but it's important to know that mold comes in many colors. It comes in white, black, green, red. So, and sometimes it's not even visual, okay? But one of the most obvious signs and symptoms is, visually seeing the mold, okay? Another often predictable symptom is the odor, the smell and odor of mold as well too. And then also seeing condensation on surfaces, on windows all the time. When you're seeing that condensation, that's humidity, and humidity leads to dampness, and dampness leads to mold, okay? So when you see constant condensation on surfaces and windows, then you have a humidity issue that you need to address. And you can address that with a really great humidifier as well too. So there are some simple issues before you actually get to the point where you have mold all over the house. But again, if you see a lot of condensation everywhere, then you need to address it, all right? Another thing is a history of water damage, okay? So leaking plumbing, a basement that got flooded as well too. Exterior leaks that are coming from the roof, or maybe the gutters, or maybe a window that wasn't properly sealed, or maybe a door that isn't properly flush, to the frame. Looking for those type of previous issues that have always been there, that have always lent to the indoor or interior of the home being exposed to more moisture as well too. So looking for a history of water damage, and that history of water damage could be, looking at the ceilings and the drywall and seeing, discoloration, brown and yellow spots. It could be seeing warped parts of the drywall as well, the wall that you see behind me. If that begins to become warped in any way, probably a good telltale sign that there's water damage as well too. Also noticing that the gutters don't properly flow water out from the home, okay? Sometimes your gutters could work, but if the water is hitting right there at the foundation and running back into the foundation, at some point it can create a leak as well too. So you may be cleaning your gutters, but if the water isn't running away from the house, then that's an issue as well too. I would also say, again, properly maintaining your HVACs, changing out the filters, checking those water trays if you have one, just periodically going up there to make sure like there's no leaks, things of that nature as well too, no condensation that needs to be addressed as well too, because you can address that with a very cheap option as well too. Roof leaks. And I also think if you live in a area that is prone to flooding as well too. So if it's well established that you live in an area that's prone to flooding, or if the grade of your home let's say the driveway runs down at an angle into the home, or the back of the house runs at an angle towards the house, or on the side of the house, either one. If water runs towards the house, then you definitely have a potential where there could be some issues with water getting into the home and thus causing issues with mold. And then check for all the wet areas in your home periodically. You know, I'm always, even when I go to other people's house, now that I do it so often for my own home, I'm always checking my ceilings to make sure everything is good, checking the walls, checking the faucets to make sure I don't have a leaky faucet, making sure that the toilet stools aren't like, you know, constantly making that noise. When you start to hear that noise after flushing for a prolonged period, then you have an issue with your toilet that needs to be addressed. And if you don't address this issue down the line, it can become a bigger issue that can lead to a leak, okay? That actually happened with me with a rental property that I had once. I had some tenants living there. They were under the impression, they knew that there was a leak in the toilet, and they never really told me about it. And to my knowledge, after having a conversation with them, it was something crazy that they did in the bathroom, and it caused the initial leak. They thought they fixed it, but they didn't. And what happened was the toilet continued to have that long running sound. And, you know, and part of it is my fault because I would have someone go in there and do a home inspection once a year. And one of the things that I've learned since that time was to flush every toilet to make sure it flushes properly. And that toilet began leaking from the upstairs down into the downstairs, which was this area that the water was pooling all over the ceiling. And so what happened was that area above not only had mold, but it got so warped. And this is something, again, you could see visually, of course, before the actual, catastrophe. The catastrophe was the downstairs ceiling just caved in. And all you could see was this black mold, okay? And so it cost me thousands of dollars. And it started with a simple toilet. A simple fix that could have cost about $85. So it's hugely important to understand that small issues can turn into huge issues, all right? So having this eye where you can see, not only current leaks, but past leaks. So if you're about to rent a home, walking into a home, and you can even tell when somebody's painted over a portion of the wall, and all of a sudden there's this really nice paint in one area, and then the rest of the area sort of looks dingy or like old. It could be that they're painting over those wet spots that are potentially mold. So it's hugely important. I tell people, even if you're not buying the home, if you're moving into a home, you should get a home inspection before you move in, okay? To have them address these issues before you move. You could be saving yourself from moving into an apartment that you potentially stay in for years, not knowing that there's mold in the home, breathing this in every day, all right? So those are the primary indicators that you have, mold in the home and things that you can look for. Let's get into what are some of those tests that you could take to sort of make sure, to confirm the diagnosis, all right? So I gave you the signs and symptoms, okay? Check that video out. I told you the ways that you can see mold in the home, all right? So do your home inspection on that one. Now, if you've confirmed I got all these symptoms, and then you're looking in your home and you see the mold, now it's probably a good time where you can take the opportunity to go into your physician and now say to yourself, hey, I want to get this test to confirm it. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've done one of these tests because I maybe had one of the symptoms, and then I did have a mold issue at one point in time in one home that I lived in. But for me, that wasn't enough because I only had one symptom. Okay, and as I told you before in the other video, one symptom isn't enough to confirm mold toxicity, just like one symptom isn't enough to confirm anything. And so I wanted to have a test done. And so the first test is what I did. I did a visual acuity test. And this is a visual acuity test you can get online for like $15. And what it does is it simply measures your ability to differentiate between black, white, and gray lines. Okay, so you can go online and do that. You could do that at your next eye appointment as well too. But that's one of the cheapest ways to kind of see if you possibly have a mold toxicity issue. All right, number 2 is a urine mycotoxin test, okay? And what this does is it looks at your urine to determine if you have any mycotoxin metabolites, which are essentially byproducts of the body trying to break down these mycotoxins or mold toxins, and now they're in the urine and you can see them in the urine, okay? So you can do that urine test, okay? You can also do what's called an OAT test. An OAT test is an organic acids test. And an organic acids test is gonna look at, do you have a yeast overgrowth or a bacteria overgrowth as well too, okay? So you could do an OAT test as well too. And then you can also do what's called an ERMI test, ERMI, okay? This not only tests for mold, but it tests the dust as well too. And this is where mycotoxins can grow as well too. Those spores can land on the dust, okay? And eventually lead to mycotoxins, okay? They can go in your body and become mycotoxins. So it's really important to know and understand that when you do a test like an ERMI test, you can also do that test not only in the home, but you also can do that on your car. And here's why it's important with cars. Quite often people buy cars and they don't know that they're buying a car that possibly came from Florida where there was a hurricane and the car got literally flooded above the roof of the car. And the car was sitting in water for 3 or 4 days. And then they got the car, totaled it out. The insurance totals it out. They sent it to, a junkyard. A junkyard then sells this to a used car lot that goes and purchases it. They go clean the car out, make sure it runs, hands it to you. Unfortunately, now there's mold all in the car and you spend, if not most of your time outside of the house in the car, driving to and from work and places you want to go, and you don't know that you're breathing in mold every day. All right, so this is why you also can do that ERMI test, the ERMI test. Not only on your home, but on your car as well too, okay? Especially if you didn't get a new car, all right? And you know that you already have an issue with mold and you're trying to confirm it, you also can do it there. And they'll take a moisture meter to sort of look at the moisture and look at the air as well too. And it's important to know and understand, mold can live in the drywall, it can live in your insulation, your upholstery, so it can get in your furniture. It can get in the carpet, okay? So your mold could be coming from, your kids had a little party or were walking, spilt a huge amount of water somewhere. It was on the carpet and they thought, well, it's only water, I'll just let it dry. Well, guess what? That water got under the carpet, into the wood, and now caused mold under the carpet that spread throughout the entire living room. Okay, so again, it's important to know that mold can live in any place where wetness or dampness has been created. There's darkness under the carpet, example, and it could create humidity. Okay, so it's a perfect environment for that. So I hope this video has been helpful. I was inspired by this video because there were 2 children, small children, who died as a result of getting mold toxicity. And I thought that was pretty tragic. And when you start to look at how much this affects the underserved community, the Black and brown community, around asthma, around, our living conditions, I thought it was a very important conversation for us to have. And although it's not just for people who are living underserved, because as I used in the other example, somebody who had a brand new house had mold as well too. I thought it was important for me to bring this up because quite often this isn't a conversation that is being had. When people are going into the doctor, they can't figure out what's wrong with this person. They're treating them with this medication and for this condition, and none of those are the actual cause, okay? And it's because simply this is something that we're just not taught. Thanks for watching this video, but be sure to check the next video out that's right here. But everything I talk about is how do we take a holistic and natural approach to healing other than a man-made approach? And also, how do we prevent dis-ease in the body as well too? Because, they say